I never planned to betray anyone. That's the lie I start with, even now. Because technically, it's true. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to ruin my relationship, my reputation, and my sense of self. There was no intention, no plan, no countdown. There was just work, and comfort, and time spent in the wrong place with the wrong person. It started in the most boring way possible. An open office, neutral colors, the constant hum of computers and air conditioning, meetings that went on too long, coffee that tasted burnt no matter where you got it. She joined our team on a Monday. No dramatic entrance, no instant spark. She introduced herself, smiled politely, and sat down at the desk across from mine. That was it. If you had told me that morning how much damage would grow out of that moment, I would have laughed. At first, she was just efficient, organized, reliable, calm under pressure, the kind of coworker managers love and people trust without thinking about it. We worked on the same projects, which meant shared deadlines and shared stress. We talked about work, only work, or so I thought. Work has a way of stripping people down. You see them tired, irritated, frustrated. You hear their real tone, not the one they use at family dinners or first dates. After a few weeks, the conversations changed. Not suddenly, subtly. Complaints about management, jokes about pointless meetings, comments about how exhausting it all felt. Small things, human things. I was in a long-term relationship at the time. Stable, comfortable, predictable. We lived together. We shared routines, groceries, weekends, plans that sounded reasonable when we talked about them. Nothing was wrong, and that's important. There was no big fight, no emotional distance, no neglect, just familiarity. One evening, we stayed late at the office. Deadlines don't care about personal lives. Most people left around 7. We stayed. At first, we worked in silence, then music, then occasional comments just to break the quiet. At some point, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. I feel invisible lately, she said. She didn't look at me when she said it. I didn't ask what she meant. I just listened. Listening feels harmless. It feels kind, supportive, neutral. But listening is intimacy, especially when someone isn't used to being heard. She told me about her relationship, not in detail, just enough. Long-term, comfortable, drifting. Words I recognized immediately. I nodded, said things like, yeah, I get that and it makes sense. I didn't mention my own relationship. I didn't need to. After that night, something shifted. Not attraction, proximity. We talked more easily, laughed more freely, shared small personal details without realizing we were doing it. I still went home every night. I still kissed my partner goodbye in the morning. I still believed I was a good person. That's the dangerous part. You don't feel like a villain while you're becoming one. The office became our shared space. Private jokes, meaningful looks, silent understanding during meetings. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing you could point to and say, there. That's where it crossed the line. And that's exactly how lines disappear. The first moment I noticed my behavior changing was stupidly small. I caught myself choosing my clothes more carefully on workdays. Not for meetings. For her. That realization made my stomach tighten. I ignored it. At home, things were unchanged. We ate dinner together, watched shows, talked about workdays in vague terms. I didn't feel guilty yet. Guilt needs clarity. And everything was still blurred. Another late night. Another deadline. We ordered food and ate at our desks. At some point, she laughed at something I said and touched my arm. Just briefly. Just casually. I felt it everywhere. She pulled her hand away almost immediately. We didn't mention it, but the air felt different after that. Heavier. I should have created distance. I should have changed teams. Set boundaries. Gone home earlier. Instead, I told myself it was nothing. That adults can have close friendships. That attraction isn't action. That I was still in control. That night, lying next to my partner, I stared at the ceiling longer than usual. Not thinking about sex. Thinking about conversations. About how easy it felt to talk at work. About how awake I felt there. That scared me, so I pushed the thought away. The next week, she asked you if I wanted to grab coffee during lunch. Not after work. Not a drink. Coffee. That detail mattered to me. It made it feel safe. I said yes. We sat across from each other in a crowded cafe. Nothing romantic. No candles. No quiet corners. And yet, it felt intimate in a way that surprised me. She looked at me and said, "I don't usually talk like this at work." I smiled. "Me neither," I said. Another lie. She asked me if I was happy. Not at work. In general. I hesitated. That hesitation said more than my answer. From that point on, I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. How quiet my relationship at home felt. How predictable our conversations were. How little effort we put into being present. I told myself this was normal. That long-term relationships just settle. I didn't tell myself that I was already comparing. Nothing physical happened, and that became my excuse. As long as nothing physical happened, I told myself, I was still loyal, still good, still safe. But emotional closeness doesn't stay still. It leans forward. It asks questions. It demands more space. One evening, as we packed up to leave, she looked at me and said quietly, "This feels dangerous." I laughed. "Work is always dangerous," I said. She didn't laugh back. I went home that night feeling uneasy. Not excited. Uneasy. Because some part of me knew the truth before I was ready to admit it. Something had already started, and I hadn't stopped it after she said it felt dangerous. I should have stepped back. That sentence was a warning, clear, honest, rare. Instead, I treated it like a challenge. Not because I wanted or because I didn't want to confront myself. The next few days, I tried to act normal. Short answers. Professional tone. Fewer jokes. It lasted less than a week. Work doesn't allow distance when two people are already emotionally close. You still sit in the same meetings. Still share tasks. Still exchange looks when something goes wrong. Avoidance only made everything louder. She noticed. Of course she did. One afternoon, she asked if she'd said something wrong. I shook my head too quickly. No, just busy. Another half-truth. The kind that poisons everything slowly. What I didn't say was that I was afraid. Afraid of how easy it felt, afraid of how much I looked forward to seeing her, afraid of how dull everything else suddenly seemed in comparison. I started staying later again. So did she. And this time, we didn't pretend it was about deadlines. One night, the office was nearly empty. Lights dimmed automatically. The quiet felt intentional, like the building itself expected something to happen. We sat across from each other, laptops open, not really working. She looked tired. I asked if she was okay. She smiled and said she was fine. I knew that lie. She told me her partner had stopped asking questions, stopped checking in, stopped noticing when she was sad. She said it casually, like she didn't care, but her hands were shaking slightly. I told her she deserved to feel seen. That sentence mattered more than I understood at the time. I didn't talk about my relationship. That silence was deliberate now, because saying it out loud would have forced me to draw a line, and I didn't want to. The first time we hugged, it felt natural. Too natural. It happened at the end of a long night, almost automatically. A tired, comforting gesture. But it lasted longer than it should have. Not sexual. Intimate. I felt her breathe against my shoulder. Felt how reluctant she was to pull away. When she finally did, neither of us spoke. We both knew. From that moment on, everything had weight. Every message carried implication. Every glance felt intentional. Every moment alone felt charged. Still, we hadn't kissed. Still, I told myself it wasn't cheating. That word matters more than it should. At home, I became distant without meaning to. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't cold. I was distracted. When my partner talked, I listened just enough to respond. When we spent time together, my mind wandered. I hated myself for noticing how quiet everything felt. But I didn't stop. She texted me one night after work. Just a simple message. I keep thinking about what we're doing. I stared at my phone for a long time. Then I typed, "Me too." That was the moment. Not the kiss. Not the affair. That message. Because from then on, I was choosing it. The next week, we had a work trip. Nothing glamorous. One night. One hotel. I told myself I'd be careful. I told myself I wouldn't let anything happen. I believed it. The hotel bar was nearly empty. We sat across from each other, pretending it was normal, talking about work, about travel, about nothing. She asked me why I stayed in my relationship. The question felt unfair. I didn't answer right away. "I don't know," I finally said. That was the most honest thing I'd said in weeks. She asked if I was happy. Again, I didn't lie this time. I just looked at my drink. That silence said enough. Back in the elevator, the space felt too small. No one spoke. When the doors opened on her floor, she hesitated, looked at me. "I shouldn't," she said. I nodded. She stepped out, then stopped, and turned back. The kiss wasn't passionate. It was desperate, like two people finally admitting what they'd already done emotionally. I kissed her back without hesitation. That's the part that stays with me, not the act, the lack of resistance. After, we stood there, stunned. No smiles, no relief, just reality crashing in. "This can't continue," she said. I agreed, and meant it. For about 12 hours. The next morning, I woke up with a weight in my chest. Not excitement, shame. I called my partner and told them I missed them. Another lie wrapped in truth. Back at work, everything was different. We avoided eye contact at first, then failed. Once you cross a line, pretending it didn't exist becomes exhausting. The affair didn't explode into passion. It settled into routine. Stolen moments, closed doors, silent understanding. It didn't feel thrilling anymore. It felt necessary. That scared me more than anything else. I stopped thinking about consequences. That's how you know you're lost. Not when you feel desire. When you stop caring about the cost. At home, trust was still there, unquestioned. That trust became unbearable. I started imagining the moment it would break. I didn't realize how close it was. The end didn't come with a confrontation. It came with exposure. A message seen at the wrong time. A name that didn't belong. A silence that stretched too long. I watched my partner's face change. Confusion, shock, understanding. And I knew. The worst part wasn't being caught. It was knowing I had earned it. The truth didn't come out in a dramatic way. There was no shouting. No accusations thrown across the room. No moment where I could pretend it was a misunderstanding. It came out quietly, which somehow made it worse. My partner didn't find messages. They found hesitation. A pause that lasted too long, an answer that came too late, a look on my face that didn't match my words. Sometimes the truth doesn't need evidence, it recognizes itself. They asked me one question. Not who she was, not how long it had been happening, not why. Just, how long have you stopped choosing me? I didn't have an answer, because the truth was uncomfortable. I hadn't stopped choosing them all at once. I had stopped in pieces. I told them everything, not to be honest but because there was nothing left to protect. Every sentence felt like removing another layer of skin. The office, the late nights, the conversations, the kiss. I watched the person I loved listen in silence. That silence was heavier than any anger. They didn't cry right away. They sat very still. And that terrified me. Because when people stop reacting, it means something inside them has already shut down. What hurts the most, they finally said, is that you let me feel safe while you were breaking it. I had no defense. There isn't one. The relationship didn't end that night. It lingered, like something already dead that no one wants to acknowledge yet. We tried to talk, we tried to be calm, we tried to act like adults. But trust doesn't rebuild itself because you want it to. Every question sounded like an interrogation. Every reassurance sounded rehearsed. Love turned into vigilance. and vigilance kills intimacy. At work, things collapsed faster. Word spread quietly, not through gossip, through tension. People notice when two coworkers stop pretending well. HR called me in. There were conversations that felt polite and cold. Conflict of interest, professional boundaries, company values. I resigned before they could decide for me. I didn't want another meeting where everyone pretended this was just policy. She and I never spoke again. Not properly. There was no goodbye, no closure, just avoidance. Two people who had created something destructive and didn't know how to look at it anymore. That silence felt deserved. At home, the atmosphere changed completely. We moved carefully around each other, like strangers sharing a space out of obligation. I apologized more times than I can count. Not because I expected forgiveness, because I needed them to know I understood what I'd done. They listened, but listening doesn't mean healing. Eventually, they said something that ended everything. I don't hate you, they said. I just don't trust the version of you I see now. That sentence stayed with me, because it was honest, and because trust isn't something you can negotiate back. The breakup was quiet. No screaming, no slammed doors. Just packing boxes and dividing memories like assets. I watched them leave with a suitcase and felt the weight of what I had traded away. Not for love, for escape. Afterward, my life shrank. New job, smaller apartment. Long evenings with too much silence. Friends asked what happened. I said it didn't work out. That was easier than explaining how slowly I had dismantled my own life. People think the punishment for betrayal is losing someone. It's not. The real punishment is losing certainty about yourself. I no longer trusted my instincts. Every feeling felt suspicious. Every connection felt dangerous. I used to believe cheating was a single act, a moment, a mistake. Now I know it's a process, a series of small decisions to stay quiet when you should speak, to stay close when you should step back, to protect comfort instead of integrity. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because betrayal rarely looks like monsters and villains. It looks like people who are tired, lonely, unwilling to confront uncomfortable truths. People like me. If you're listening to this and you feel that line starting to blur, hear this clearly. Distance is still a choice. Honesty is still an option. Leaving is painful, but staying silent is worse. I lost a relationship. I lost a job. But the hardest thing I lost was the belief that I would never be that person. Now I carry that knowledge quietly, every day. This is my confession. Not to be forgiven, but to be understood. Because some mistakes don't end when the story does. They stay, and they change you.